In this age of new normal, online is not your only option. Because new normal means new learning modalities and new learning possibilities. Let Vibal make learning offline possible with Smart Class. Smart Class contains pre-made daily modules sequenced according to DepEd's budgeted teaching and learning calendar. Each module has a specific lesson duration and has day markers to guide parents and teachers in the asynchronous learning of learners. Inside the modules available in Smart Class, you will find the following elements. First, learning competencies are identified in the module openers. Kickstarters are available to test students' prior knowledge on the subject matter. This set of activities, found at the beginning of each lesson, may also serve as motivational activities. Parents of preschool to grade 2 students will also find notes to parents which contain tips and pointers on how they can guide their child while learning at home. Redefine your students' learning experience with the integration of augmented reality technology into images and illustrations available in Smart Class, making learning more interactive and exciting. At the end of each module, Long Quiz is also available to assess students' understanding of the lesson. Smart Class also features Wrap Up, a lesson ender activity that applies the constructivism theory of learning. In Wrap Up, students are expected to summarize the lesson on their own using a graphic organizer. You may also evaluate the quality of your students' learning by letting them practice their learning in real life through GRASP's formatted performance tasks. The content of Smart Class is designed for the entire academic year, and it is available for 5 major subjects. All aligned with DepEd's K-12 curriculum and covers the most essential learning competencies prescribed by DepEd. Secure your own copy of Smart Class before classes open. Contact marketing@vibalgroup.com to know more.
Good day, Kavibal, and welcome to our Learn at Home session. For the discussion today, the topic will be on integrating language across content areas, maximizing learning materials available at home. Before we begin, take note of the following reminders. Make sure you are registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.vibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions on the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by our speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAsOnePH as our official hashtag to our Vibal webinars. Experience learning, Kavibal. And now, to proceed with our webinar this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today. He is a consultant and evaluator for K-12 Philippine Basic Education, curriculum and academic consultant of Sisters of Mary. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Brother Roderick M. Aguirre.
Good evening, viewers. Welcome again for our continuation of our this afternoon's topic on language learning and about struggling learners. We started off our session for today with me, of course, on understanding how we can come up with practical home activities and programs for us to be able to address the certain deficits, identified deficits of our struggling readers and our learners. And right now, this evening, we're now going to continue on with our topic, and this time we'll be focusing on integrating language across content areas, how we can help our students transfer the skills that they are learning in their language subjects to the other content areas. And I prepared about 28 slides, but I'm hoping that we will be able to finish either exactly 8 o'clock or 5 minutes before that due to my responsibilities to my congregation, and we have a novena tonight. On that note, let me share my PowerPoint presentation with you. Okay, here we go. So this evening, we'll be focusing more on integrating language across content areas. Last time we talked about, I think that was a week ago. We talked about teaching comprehension, teaching comprehension across subject areas. This time, we'll be focusing on language in general and how we can help our students be able to see that the language skills that they're learning from Filipino and English can be transferred to the language use and understanding of the content through the language of the different subject areas. I may not be able to give you lots of examples, but I'll try to give you, an example that will give you an idea of what I'm trying to explain due to, of course, a limited time, but nonetheless, that will not stop us from continuing on with our learning process. At the same time, I would like to encourage you all to write your questions and clarifications on the comments box below. And plus, if you have other topics you would like the Vidball group to provide you with and to schedule in the future, please give your comments in the comments box below. Also, the handouts for the talks, my webinars before and my webinar today will be made available upon your request. Our moderator will just explain it to you probably in a while how you can get hold of the handouts that I prepared for you. So the outline for tonight's topic will be rather short because it is more of just, how we can mitigate and bridge the application of language skills learned in the language subjects to the other content areas. So I'll have my introduction again. I'll just identify some common myths about language learning, and then that will be our basis for our explanation for the questions that we're going to answer tonight. And during the discussion, we'll have a little bit of mini workshop. In the mini workshop is more of an example how such an integration can happen from a language subject to a content area. So these are the questions that we're going to answer tonight. What is language and content integration? And then the second question would be, what model can be used to do language and content integrated learning? And third, how can language learning be integrated with the other content areas? So I think we can merge the answers to question 2 and 3. Nonetheless, I prepared some examples and how to somehow detail how we can strike a balance between language and content. Then I will entertain your questions and clarifications that if you have, and I'll try to answer them as honest as I can. Now, for those viewers who already know what I'm talking about, I'm happy to tell you at least this is more of an affirmation that you know, and if you know more, it's okay. Thank you very much if you know more, and I would gladly appreciate if you can, add on to some of the information, if you can give some comments below. What we want here is an interaction, an online interaction where we get to learn together and not boast of what we know and or to diminish other teachers who may not have an idea of how language and content is integrated. Let us all be humble of all the things that we know and what we do not know. We're here as educators to share information because I believe, and we should believe together, that knowledge is not shared, it is nothing. All right, and then we'll have conclusions and implications. Let's begin. I identified 3 myths that is common to most educators, most especially to most non-language teachers. So let's identify the 3, beginning with this. Proficiency in the English or English language, proficiency in the English is strong determining factor of your high cognitive functions. A lot of individuals, not just teachers, but also students and parents have this idea that if individuals have a strong command or have a high proficiency level of the English language, both oral and written, it determines or it is likened to that individual is rather intelligent than the rest of probably individuals who may not have strong proficiency level or high proficiency level of the English language in both oral and written. This is myth, because proficiency in the English language, I would rather say proficiency in a language, because if our students, the language per se does not determine the level of intelligence or the level of emotional intelligence of individual. All right, it is the language is more of a vehicle of our mental processing, and therefore one language does not determine the proficiency of one language does not determine, specifically English, does not determine the high capacity and ability of individual. May mga tao po na maaring hindi magaling mag-Ingles, ngunit ang taas na po nilang kaalaman at pagkatuto gamit ang wikang Filipino o ang wika na kanilang kinagisnan. That would be your mother tongue. So English does not just English per se. It could be other languages. Okay, in fact, all languages. Okay, all language has a capacity to determine the cognitive functions of individuals. Again, not just English. Okay, so tanggalin po natin ang myth na pag ang tao magaling mag-English, matalino. It does not follow. Non sequitur. Next would be native speakers of English are better teachers of English, or better yet, a lot of Filipinos have a high regard for individuals who have a near native-like proficiency in the use of the English language. And then if they hear Filipinos using English with a Tagalog accent or a mother tongue accent, they would tag the person as if that person is not worth respect. I've seen a lot of principals, a lot of superintendents, a lot of education experts in the Philippines who may not have native-like English proficiency, but they are really, really intelligent. So I believe that being native-like speaker of the language or being a native speaker of the English language does not make you a better teacher of other teachers who's using English as second language or a foreign language. Again, English is not per se would determine who's better or who's not. Okay. Third myth: learning two languages confuse children or impair their cognitive ability. Now, a lot of research shows that there are a lot of individuals, a lot of children out there, even not just in the Philippines, but outside the Philippines, all over the world, who are learning 2 to 3 languages at the same time. And it does not impair in any way their cognitive functions. In fact, it boosts their mental capacities to the point that because of augmented vocabulary and augmented cultures, they get to be more knowledgeable over those children who are only learning one language, because of the idea that language with it comes culture. Although we can debate on that, I'm not mentioning some theories about that, but language embeds with it are certain meanings and certain cultures that once learned, once acquired, and add on to other languages, it builds on and adds on to the ability and the knowledge, and of course, the intelligence of an individual learning more languages. On that note, let us start with our discussion. So let us now understand how we can integrate language learning with the other content area to maximize students' learning at home. Time check, it's already 7:03, so I can finish my talk by 7:30 or 7:40, and then I can entertain questions. Let's start with the question number 1. What is language and content integration? All right, so language and content integration is the idea and the process and the principle and a belief that language is amorphous. Language in itself doesn't have a shape. It wouldn't have a vehicle on which it will be used. Hence, it needs a content, okay? A content, it could be a discipline where it can be situated and contextualized so that people using the language will have a certain common ground to start a conversation or start communication, because language is primarily used for exchange of meanings, exchange of ideas, which is what we call as a process of communication. Language in itself is amorphous, it doesn't have life in itself, all right? Well, not just like disciplines, you have science, like language as used in sciences, language is used in mathematics and all other disciplines like engineering and so on. So therefore, since language is amorphous, it takes the shape of other subject areas. It takes the nature and culture of the other subject area. On that note, it's very important for our students to understand that the language would somehow conform to how a certain subject area would utilize a certain language. That's why we can say, we can tell our students that even if you have learned English in English in the English language or English subject, you still need to understand how English behaves in mathematics and science. And therefore, science teachers and math teachers need to help our students understand the nature of the behavior of the English language in their own discipline. All right. You will observe that even if mathematics teachers are using English and when they discuss amongst each other, a lot of other content area teachers have difficulty understanding their conversation, even if it's English. All right. In like manner, other teachers listening over to conversations of science teachers talk about physics and chemistry, even if they're using English, but because it's physics and chemistry English, it somehow is incomprehensible to those who are outside the discipline. All right, so that's one of those situations that we need to help our students understand, because they may have learned the language for language in itself, but they must learn that language and how this language will behave in other disciplines so that they can adjust to such changes and such demands. Also, language, since it's amorphous, is also a tool for learning, all right? We need to teach our students that as we, not just English, okay, but all languages, it's a vehicle of thought, a vehicle of processing idea. And we go back to the basic idea of linguistics by Sapir-Whorf, I apologize, by, anyway, I forgot the, when we have this kind of conversation, it's online, I forget some of the theories. Anyway, it helps in the processing information to process certain concepts that may have different labels outside. And it gives a certain concreteness of ideas we have in our mind. And it also is a tool for literature, for writing, for creative writing and representing, the best of human works. A good example would be you have for composing and writing poetry, even music, also for mental computations in English too, thoughts per se, and memory processes, right, involved. On that note, I would like to use the model of Dr. Melchor ay Tatlong Hari that he presented in one of his that he mentioned in one of his presentations way back in 2008. He mentioned that since that language is amorphous and it takes the shape of the content area. A good example, these are the shapes of the content areas, and the subject areas most likely would not have the same nature and same cognitive demands. I would say cognitive demands from students. That's why a good way to help our students is that during in our language lessons, we provide them with the different text types. I mentioned already different text types during my talk on my webinar on teaching comprehension of informational text. That would help our students be able to identify some of the cognitive demands via text types and text organizations in the subject area, and thereby helping them think and think of how the language behaves that the subject in that particular content. So let's say, okay, language behaves, say, in science. Therefore, language takes the shape of the science, all right? Well, all about language. You have the vocabulary, you have the structure, syntax, grammar. It will behave the way how language is used in science. In like manner, in mathematics, in like manner too, in social studies. All right. That's why it is very important for us, especially for our students, that they will be learning from the different content areas, and therefore that language, which we call now as the MOTL, the medium of teaching and learning, is a vehicle. Okay, is the vehicle for students to understand the content or the content of the content areas. It is very important for us as language teachers to help our students be able to transfer the skills in the language in the different subject areas. Okay, let's have an example though. Let's say one of the elements of language would be vocabulary, or, well, linguistically we call that morphology, but let's just, simply call it as vocabulary. And let's look at the first statement. Let's read that. The table, I highlighted the word table. That means I would like you to focus on how the word table takes the shape of the context in the sentence. And I would like you to identify which content would that most likely fall under. All right. So the table broke because it was not able to withstand the weight of the students standing and jumping on top of it. It should have been on top of it, but I just copied this from a particular book. I'm not going to mention what discipline. All right, so I'll let you guess later on how this word is used in the sentence and which discipline or content area this sentence or context of the sentence would most likely be under. All right, and next we have number 3. The third, well, this is kind of obvious though. All right, it's obvious. The third grade math teacher drilled her students every day in order to memorize the multiplication table. So we're still looking at the use of table, but then again, since there's a context of the word math, we know now that the table here is not similar to how the table was used in sentence 1. All right, let's now have third sentence. The periodic table, also known as the periodic table of elements, is a tabular display of the chemical elements which are arranged by atomic number, electron configuration, and recurring chemical properties. You will observe that these 3 sentences are using the same word table, but on the context of what we have just discussed about how language behaves and how it conforms to the shape of the subject area, are we to say that the table word here, that this 3 sentences uses only one vocabulary, table? No. Thank you very much. That's the right answer. No. The table in sentence 1 is a different table from sentence 2. And the table in sentence 3 is a different table from sentence 1 and sentence 3. Therefore, there we have one table, that word table, but it has 3 meanings as used in different content. Therefore, there are 3 words in my example. All right. So therefore, we need to teach our students that words and the meaning of words will depend on how it is used in context, and the context would most likely give us an idea of the discipline on which this language was used on. So we need to help our students to be more mindful of the topic and the content on which the language is being used. Hindi lang pwede kasi na tinuturo lang natin English, tinuturo lang natin Filipino. Dapat itinuturo natin sa mga bata kung paano ginagamit ang wikang ito sa iba't ibang larang. Kaya nga po nagkaroon po tayo ng asignatura sa senior high school ng ang Filipino gamit sa ibang larang. I don't know how to pronounce it right, but I've heard a lot of Filipino experts saying larang or larang. But I may be wrong on it, but I'm thinking that in English it means using Filipino in different disciplines, I guess, or industries. It's kind of the same with English, how English behaves in different subject areas. My point here with this example is that if we only teach our students the language per se on a certain context and not multiple contexts, and not integrating that and directly and implicitly making our students aware that it has this kind of behavior in a particular subject area, then one way or the other, we're only teaching our students language as a tool for learning. But we have failed to help our students to see that the language and learn that the language is a tool for other disciplines and expressing your ideas in other disciplines. All right. So there are a lot of students who are so conversant in the English language, in the subject English, but when they are in science, all of a sudden it's difficult for them to explain concepts. Reason probably is that they lack the necessary vocabulary, if not the vocabulary, the language structure demanded of them in that particular subject area. All right? So medyo dun tayo nagkakaroon ng problema, ang mga bata nagkakaroon ng problema if teachers, language teachers do not explicitly help our students mitigate and bridge the gap between the language skills taught in the language subjects to how they are used and applied in other subject areas aside from English. So I would like to mention Jack Richards' challenge to all language teachers in Southeast Asia and the world during the 2015 RELC. I was one of the plenary speakers there, and Jack Richards shared this to us and during our conversations too. During dinner and breakfast, he said that there are a lot of new opportunities for out-of-class language learning, and that language teachers should think outside the parameters of their discipline, of their subject area. And a lot of teachers who have been teaching English and Filipino are teaching it as just a language, and not just not helping students to see how language can be a tool for them to be able to survive the demands, academic demands of the other subject areas, not to mention to improve one's learning skills and learning processes, learning techniques and strategies. He said that if teachers, language teachers are able to integrate how English or Filipino or mother tongue behaves in science, how is this used in science and ICT and mathematics, and to history and to sociology, and even to other disciplines outside the academic world, like travel and lifestyle, then we have successfully taught our students functional use of the English language. And that's why he is, which I totally agree, he is propagating and he's advocating that the use of the teaching of the language should be more of functional use than of just the idea of teaching our students the idea of knowing a language. Because at the end of the day, if our students have memorized grammar, they know accentuation for oral fluency and so on and so forth, and yet when they go back home and they go to different social situations which demands the use of the English language or Filipino language for that matter, they're not able to partake with the conversation or partake with the interaction, then somehow we have failed one or the other our students to transfer the language skills that we wanted them to acquire. Okay. Again, this is from Jack Richards, not mine, but I am putting this on the table because I totally agree with him. Okay. So let's now proceed to the second question. What model can be used to do language and content integrated language? All right. There are a lot of models out there, but the most common and being propagated right now in the whole Southeast Asia, and it's not quite new though, but it has been there, and one way or the other, it has become one of the core designs of the language curriculum in the Philippines, both Filipino and English, and even mother tongue, and we call it as CLIO, or content and language integrated learning. Okay, it's content and language integrated learning. So there are three components of CLIO. We have the learning of the subject, and then we have the learning of the language, and then we have the third one, which is to make sure that we create a certain learning experience, that our students are simultaneously learning the language and at the same time the content of the subject or the different subject area. Now, the key element here is striking a balance between learning a content and the learning a language, because at the end of the day, if you are in a language subject, which is more important, the language or the content? So it depends where you use the idea of the CLIL. If you're a language teacher, still the master would be the language, the subject language, Filipino or English, and now you are integrating the content to the learning of the language. But if you are a content area teacher, your master is the content and you are integrating language skills in order for your students to be able to learn from the content areas. So there is no definitive formula on how we can come up with a certain balance. But the idea here is that the integration must be meticulously done in such a way that it does not destroy the discipline, all right, or overcome the major discipline. And I'll give you another example on that. So content and language and learning, by the way, this was shared by Dr. Alvin Pang in 2017. And he said that content and language integrated learning, or CLIL, is a dual focused educational approach in which an additional language is used for learning and teaching of both content and language. There is focus not only on content and not only on language. Each is interwoven even if the emphasis is greater on one or another at a given time. So yun ho, hindi minsan nagpapantay ang treatment po natin. So sometimes the focus is on the content. We are just using the language for our students to learn the content, or we're using the content so that students are able to practice their language on. So it depends on the focus and the purpose of such integration. But the idea there is that we don't want to delay of such integration, that we just focus on the content and then thereby let the other language teachers teach the language of how students will learn the language of my subject. Or I will teach language skills in my English subject. I will just hope and pray that my students and the content area teachers will integrate no, it cannot be that. It must be a synergy of efforts of both the content area teachers and the language area teachers. They need to discuss together and come up with a harmonious relationship in such a way that there is a horizontal articulation, deciding on a certain time which will be the master, either the language or the content, or vice versa. Okay, so this is how we can come up with the designs of CLIL, or content language integrated learning. So we can be like too soft, meaning it's theme-based English lessons. Focus is still on language, taught by a language teacher, and then she's integrating, or he will be integrating, certain examples in the subject area. All right. I'm not gonna, this one, I'll be focusing on this though. All right. And then we have too hard, where there's immersion of how language is used in the content area. So the focus now is on the content, and just the language is being used for students to be able to learn from the content, and focuses on the content, and language learning expected to occur almost by osmosis, taught by the content area teacher. So these are the two ends of the pendulum. All right. Too soft means the language teachers are still focusing on the language and they're just integrating the content if it happens. While too hard would be the content, and one way or the other, they're just integrating some certain language elements that may occur incidentally, but then again, it still is focusing on the content and helping students, learn the language, not learn the language, eventually look at the language, how it is used in the content, and learning from it. Now, in the middle part of it is what we call as just right, is what we call now as the CLIL in itself. Both focus on both content and language, taught by the content teacher, training CLIL approach, or in collaboration with the language teacher. So in this case, just right is more of the content area teachers now consciously and explicitly helping students understand how that language behaves in their subject area, but of course with the help of the language teacher. And that on that note, they need to collaborate, because a lot of teachers in the Philippines are not language experts or not reading experts. And And the language teachers there would be, the language teacher would be there to help teachers in the content area, like science teachers, look at how they can prepare materials to make sure that there is an explicit integration of language skills in order for students, in order for students to see how that language behaves in science and therefore learn and acquire the language of science. Okay, and same principle applies to the other subject areas. Okay, so to summarize my answer to the question, what model would help us do an integration in content and language? We're not talking about CLIL. We're talking here that every subject area like math, science, EPP, TL, and all other content areas or subject areas that we have identified in our curriculum are called content areas, and each content area has its own culture, and every culture has the following three demands: the cognition, also what we call as the cognitive landscape, the way of a way of thinking and processing information in the subject area; the communication, so the way people communicate and use the language and how they interact in that discipline would be different from other subject areas; and of course the information in the and how the information is presented in the content area, like the content, would be totally different from the others. A good example would be, say, sorry, do I have an example? Yes, I have an example here. So I'm looking at the Vibal book on Learn at Home 7. If you don't have a copy yet, please grab a book, grab a copy of this, and you just go to the website of Vibal, and there are a lot of modules already about modules that have been aligned to the K-12 curriculum and to the MECs, or the mix, as you call it, or as you pronounce it. And you will observe here that there is what we call as a major text in the language per se, and they have a major text that allows students to learn from the literature, but at the same time, they presented certain minor texts that allow students to apply the language skills in the content. And then if you proceed to the other subject areas like science and mathematics, there's an explicit integration of what was taught in the language subject to the content area. A good example would be, dito po sa English, nakalagay po dito ay ang origin ng, I think it's all about how the world began, okay? It is a popular Bukidnon folktale retold. Pagdating sa Araling Panlipunan, pinag-usapan naman ang mga pinagmulan ng tao. So nagkakaroon po ng what we call as an integration from the language subject going to the other subject, na ang utak ng bata na ito pala ang focus ng language, and then it is applied to the other subjects. So mayroon tayong sinasabi na oneness of how the materials were developed. Now the challenge here for teachers is that all teachers in a particular grade level should sit down together and decide how the integration would go. Would the language teachers be the one to make focus on the teaching of the language skills? Definitely yes. Now for the application and integration of the skills will be done by the subject area with a specific mindfulness that the subject area will be guided by the language teachers, because they need to understand that the text type and what type of text was used in the language would also be the type of language, a type of text type will be used in a particular subject area. But again, we cannot do that and require that to all subject area. A good example would be here in English, ang nakalagay po dito nga ay story based. So there is what we call as text. So hindi siya maipasok sa science and mathematics lesson. Although ang kanyang nature po ay parang parang nag-experiment siya ng mga paano nagsisimula ang mga bagay-bagay. Then mathematics was on factoring. But the point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that yung topic na connect niya, pero yung language skills was specifically on text types and comprehending text types, ay nakonekta niya doon sa Araling Panlipunan. And what's good about that, ganun din sa Filipino. So nagkaroon ng oneness ang Filipino and English na hindi na nga nakikita sa utak ng bata. Bakit? Magkaiba ang skills ba ng English at Filipino? What's good about this design is that students are able to see that magkaiba lang siguro ang ang wikang Filipino at English on certain elements, pero ang skills ay pareho lang. Well, what's a good design, all right? So here are the principles of, before I proceed on, animatedly explaining, showing to you how the book was designed and can be utilized. So these are the principles of CLIO. So let's look at content. Content is progression in knowledge, skills, understanding related to specific elements of a defined curricula, meaning it somehow, through these principles, our students are able to acquire the necessary knowledge and skills in the content area, because the content area teachers help students understand the language of the content. Alright? So, dapat daw ang mga content area teachers nagtuturo din ng vocabulary, nagtuturo din ng structure ng language ng kanilang subject area, hindi lang ang English teacher o hindi lang ang Filipino teacher. On that note, dapat din po ang school natin, ang mga school po natin dyan, ay nagre-request sa mga language teachers to provide our content area teachers with certain language trainings so that they can now be equipped to do CLIL. Kasi content area teachers were trained to teach the content. And one way or the other, they may not have been given ample training during their college days or in their in-service training days, ways how language behaves in their content. Okay? A good example po, ako po kasi ay nag-bio po ako noon. So one example po nun, example po ng language behavior sa science is that magkaiba po ang mga nature ng proper names namin sa science, ordinary definition of proper names. Sa amin kasi proper names ay the scientific terms. Okay? Pag mga common names o scientific names, ayun ang proper names. Ayun ang aming proper names. Pag common names po, hindi namin kinakapitalize. A good example would be, say, di ko naman ano yung mga scientific. Anyway, mga scientific names na mga naka-Latin po yun. Yun po ang aming sinusunod nun. So, paano kung hindi alam ng mga bata na ganun pala ang prinsipyo sa science? Okay. Another one would be the, say, pluralization. We taught our students in English that common nouns, regular nouns, para ma-pluralize po ay dinadagdagan po natin ng E or ES using the French rule. Pero, pagdating naman sa science, bakit nagtakang bata, bakit sa English tanggap ang cactuses, pero pag sa science, cacti. 'Di ba? Bakit sa English, octopuses, sa English subject, tinanggap ni teacher ang octopuses, pero pagdating sa science, ang gumagawa ko ng scientific paper, hindi niya tinanggap ang octopuses, sabi niya octopi dapat. Ano ba talaga? Kasi hindi na-explain, tama naman pa rin ang English teacher. Pero dahil nga naman, not all language teachers, English teachers or Filipino teachers know how the language behaves in the subject area, hindi nga naman niya matuturo na Latin rules ang ginagamit pala sa science. Okay? Technically, pag nagsusulat ka ng technical paper, concept paper in science, we're using the science rules, not just the ordinary French rule or Old English rules or whatever rules that have somehow evolved in the English language. So meron po mga ganong sistema kagaya sa mathematics. May sarili din po siyang sistema na pag-identify kung ano ang mga technical terms, ano rin po ang mga proper names and common names, and hindi yan ididikta na dapat ang susundin po ay the general rule taught in the English language. Our math teachers and science teachers should be trained how to teach kasi hindi nagtuturo talaga ng language ang mga content area teachers. They just teach the content, hoping that the students would understand the content in the process. Hindi kasi dapat daw explicit teaching of the language and how it behaves in the content. Ganon. Kaya nga po sa science namin, nung nasa bio po ko, meron po kami talagang subject or lessons on the language of science. We had to memorize how to convert, paano kami mag-construct. Kasi iba ang, kagaya sa nursing, mayroong English for nurses, yung mga ganun. Or also commonly known as English for specific purposes. Okay? So another principle would be communication, using language to learn, whilst learning to use language. And we need to help our students be able to use the language for them to be able to communicate in a certain subject area, because the demand of the communication of a certain subject area will be different from the other. A good example would be, say, in literature, there would be a lot of emotive languages, but if it's, say, in wait, in science or mathematics, communication, there would be uh, less if no or less or absence of emotive language. Alam mo sabihin mo na uh, the beautiful triangle is leaning towards the, so hindi creative ang language ng some of the subject areas, so dapat nasasanay yung mga bata at sinasabi natin yan sa at ang math teacher should be telling the students that, otherwise students will stumble learning the content area because of the difficulty of the language. All right, next would be cognition. I always call this as the cognitive demands of the subject area, developing thinking skills which link concept formation, understanding, and language. Because nga iba ang kultura ng bawat subject area, it demands a different type of cognition from our students. Nag-iiba kasi nga, kagaya ng explain ko last time about comprehending informational text, the demand of the way we understand an informational text is one way or the other, dependent on its rhetorical pattern or how it was organized. And once we have understood, get a glimpse of how the information were organized, we are now able to, at least somehow in our mind, be able to prepare ourselves in understanding information as organized as such. And then we have the culture, as I've mentioned, would be understanding ourselves and other cultures, becoming aware of global as well as local citizenship. In short, our students add on more information because now that they can understand the content through the vehicle as language of through the vehicle of the language, now students are more in tune and focusing the content and learning more things beyond the language. So let's now have the last question. How can language learning be integrated with the other content areas? Let's have a review of the different text types, which I discussed already last week on comprehending narrative text and comprehending teaching comprehension of informational text and across subject areas. It says literary narrative. We have two text types. We have literary and we have factual. And the literary, we have narrative and poetry and drama. Factual, we have recount, explanation, discussion, exposition, procedure, response, information, and report. What's good about the text types is that we are able to understand that each of this text type, like narrative, poetry, drama, has its own certain language structure and certain rhetorical pattern, and also transitional devices or discourse markers that allow the readers and allow the language users, not just readers, but language learners, be able to get a glimpse of how information and how, what is the organization, and if that's the organization, that's the way I'm supposed to process it and understand it. So yan po ang importante ba na alam ng mga teachers, not just by the language teachers, but also content area teachers. So now, change in language teaching information to the literary text, just reminding you again that the percentage of major and minor texts for literary informational text is from kindergarten, mostly probably 90% literary text, and we have 10% informational text. As our students move up to the other grade levels, there would be now a balance of percentage in grade 6 of literary text percentage, informational text percentage. So there would be 50-50, so both are now major. But as they move on to grade 7, there will be now major text would be informational text and minor text would be literary text. So this is how we see in materials preparation, not just in the content area, but not just in the language area, but also in the content area, that as our students move up to the other grade levels, the demands for reading more informational text or factual text become higher, and therefore there will be less literary text for students to peruse over, except for the subjects except for literature that are required of in the language subjects. Okay, so let's have an example on literature and comprehend. How do we integrate language on the element of literature and comprehension? So let's say our students have focused on text type in the module for English or Filipino. So what we are gonna do here is that we're talking about here language as the major discipline to integrate the subject area, and then we'll think of how we can reverse the situation. So let's say In the preparation of the module, what we can do is that the English teachers or the Filipino teachers will have to create a major text on which the students are supposed to understand the text types for language instruction. Say the language text types, therefore, would be cause-effect relationship. So there should be a major text for students to practice on, major text for students to focus on the lesson on literature and comprehension, teaching them that this is how you're supposed to process it. And now, the teachers of the language should also prepare a practice text of probably of the same theme of the major text so that students can practice on what was on the focus of the lesson, which is on text types. So if the major text was on cause-effect relationship, therefore the practice text should be also in cause-effect relationship. And now the teacher, using soft integration of content, will now think of what particular subject area uses cause-effect relationship. I could say Araling Panlipunan would have, or social studies could have, we could have an example of social studies, and we can also have an example in science. So makikita po natin na ituturo natin sa bata sa pagtuturo ng wika na maaring ito po ay ang klase or type of text type na to ay nagagamit o ginagamit sa ganitong asignatura. On that note, dapat nag-usap kayo ng kung science ang ginamit ninyo at ang science o kaya social studies ang ginamit nyo, sa grade 7 po yun, nag-usap po kayo ng science, sa science naman siya, explicitly naman niya, i-integrate doon. So, may invert ngayon. The content now, and the content now becomes, the content teacher now mindfully integrate the idea of text types. So pwede niyang gamitin ng graphical presentations, represent that, helping students to understand the content or the lesson of the science using rhetorical patterns via graphical presentations para na-apply ng mga bata yung natutunan sa language subject to science. So the science teacher now is consciously integrating language skills taught in the language subject. So importante doon po, yun nga lang po, ang demand po ngayon ay nag-uusap ang language teachers at ang content area teachers. If they do not talk and they do not come up with ways how they can integrate each other's skills, you cannot hope that students will you cannot hope that all your students will be able to make the connection of the application of the language skills learned in the subject area and the language area subject to the subject area. And most specifically and most likely, this will be causes for students to stumble over, struggle on the learning of the content area. Well, not just in the content area, but also in the language areas too. Let's now have an example on language skills. Say, our module in English and Filipino is focusing on oral language fluency, which I already mentioned one example this afternoon, but let's just see. Say, this is now on a language subject. Now, what we can do here is that, again, it would be a major activity for a teacher to use so that students can focus on the use of oral language fluency. And then provide a practice activity for students to apply what was initially taught. And then the teacher would explicitly integrate how this language fluency can be used in the other subject area for oral communication or presentations. In like manner, pagdating naman sa kunwari sa science, pero silang science experiment report presentation, dun sana sabihin ng teacher na you have learned explicitly. I think your teachers in English or Filipino, English na lang, English, taught you the oral language fluency, like you have the accentuation, intonation, and so on and so forth. So that would be, we have to make, you have to apply that during your presentation of your experiments. And I would like you to emphasize the most important information through your intonation and through your pauses and all other oral language fluency you have learned from English. So nagkakaroon talaga ng integration. Okay? E paano kung hindi sila nag-usap? Eh di walang integration. Kanya-kanya na lang ulit. Alright? So kung ganun pong kanya-kanya, kawawa po ang bata dahil mangyayari po sa kanya ngayon, especially sa pandemic nga po, pag hindi nagkaroon ng integration, ang mangyayari sa mga bata sa bahay, ang tingin niya sa mga bawat subject area would be separate subjects and independent, and they do not have connections to each other. And that's wrong, because the learning process is that for our students to be able to be functional, is that for them to see that everything that they are learning from one subject to another can be integrated into a whole and be used as a collective knowledge and collective skills to be able to function on a certain demand in society or a certain demand to perform something. It could be create a product or perform certain skills. All right. So let's have an example of grammar, and the lesson here is is on use of past form of the verb. So again, it's in the language subject. So pwede Pilipino po ay paggamit ng pandiwa. Then there will be a major text for students to focus on ang paggamit ng pandiwa. So when I say major activity, would be the use of literature still. All right. And there will be a minor selection where the past form of the verb will be used as a practice for students, and then then the teacher would use a certain content area. Probably would be, again, since my science, ang science pa ay may oral report, gagamitin niya naman sa written report using the past tense. That the students must be able to use the past form of the verb in making sentences of recreating what they did to accomplish the science experiment, and looking at unity of tense, focusing on past form of the verb. Now, pagdating naman sa science, pagdating doon, sinabihan ng language teacher, ng lesson nga naman nila is on consistency, on unity of use of the past form of the verb. Ang science teacher would say, pero dapat sa science teacher din na-train kung paano ba ang mga forms ng past form of the verb. Baka kasi siya rin pala ay may problema. So, dapat meron din silang training on the language side of the content area. So, kaya nga, kailangan meron silang the content and the language teacher should coordinate. Well, you will now see that the demand here is that most of the responsibilities of how language will be used in the content area would fall under the hands of the content area. And the job of the language teacher is to support that integration via integrating some of the content in the examples, in the exercises in her lesson, but she also has the responsibility, if we're using Clio, to orient and retool the content area teachers about how language behaves in their subject area. So it's more of a synergy of efforts. And then on writing or representing, so an example of writing or representing, say you are teaching students writing a summary or writing a précis or making an outline. Now, in the language subject area, you can teach your students how it's done and so on and so forth. Then a practice, and at the end of it, we need to teach our students to transfer these skills, how outlining and summarizing and making a précis is done in the other subject area. So now let's reverse that to the content area. So the science teachers and the math teachers must also require students to apply the outline, but depending on what type of outlining will be used. Like in mathematics, I think they're using the numeric, the Arabic numeric outline format, like 1, 1.1, 1.1, 1.1, something like that. And therefore, dapat naturo yun muna sa language para pagdating sa math, ito palang ginagamit na type of outlining dito sa math. So si teacher ng science at mathematics will just prescribe that type of way of outlining and making a précis and how to make a summary, but somehow in the language subject area, naturo ng teachers lahat. But how can the teacher in the language be able to know how all of this behave if he or she will not converse with the other content area subject areas teachers? So on that note, so may nag-remind sa akin, on that note, language area teachers must be able to see, remind ko lang po sa inyo, ang design po natin, have a consistency of the use of literature towards the learning of the skills, grammar, expression, and then transfer literature here now transfer to how that genre is utilized in the other content areas, or what type of content utilize that type of genre or type of text type. A good example would be, say, narrative. Pwede po natin Yan po ginamit natin sa narrative, tuturuan natin ng mga bata sa language lesson as a language subject po natin. And then during the transfer, we will ask our students to apply that to making narratives, say, in social studies. Pwede pong ganon. So our point here is that in the idea of language and content area integration is that the language teachers are mindful about how to help students transfer their skills of the language towards the other subject areas so that students are able to use the language as a tool for learning and to be able to survive the academic demands of the different subject area. In like manner, on the other side, our content area teachers are also consciously integrating language elements to their subject so that students are able to understand how the language of their subject area behaves, especially in vocabulary, sentence structure, oral communication, and all other cognitive demands of the subject area so that our students will be fully equipped to be able to learn from the subject area through the vehicle of the language. On that note, I'm now ready to answer questions from you guys.
Thank you very much, Brother Roderick. Now we will proceed to the question and answer portion. Our first question is from John Torres. With this system that we're going to apply in the new normal, how can we extend our intervention to those students who are non-readers and needs a lot of our attention?
True. Doubt kayo talaga mga viewers kayo, handa. Ang ganda ng mga tanong nyo. Tama po ulit nga naman, sir. I know that you're talking about integration of the language, but remember, even if we try, yun ang gusto mong sabihin, sir eh. Was that a sir or a ma'am?
Sir po, Sir John Torres.
Sir John. Gusto mong sabihin sa akin dito, Sir John, is that, sir, ang ganda po ng design eh, but the premise there is that our students are already literate in the language, which is, you're right. Oo nga naman, the idea there of integrating the language to the other content areas is that the idea that our students somehow have, kaya nga po ang premise ko ng umaga, fluent readers na po sila, because how can we help our students transfer their language skills if they are not literate or proficient in the language to the other subject area? What a challenge daw. My answer to that is that magkakaroon po talaga tayo ng remediation of our students, and I would suggest po muna na wag ka muna kung ang mga bata po natin ay they're still learning the language, I would say wag muna kayo mag-integrate sa other subject areas or content areas. Otherwise, it will confuse so much our students. Let them first be comfortable with their language skills within the language subject area, and then by that time when they're ready to, although it would not stop us to somehow integrate certain content that are easy to understand, like science are, easy to understand, but in my perspective, like other subject areas like in some concepts in mathematics are really difficult for teaching students, say structures, grammar, because mathematics is a difficult subject where language based differently. So I would say that there are some subject areas that we can integrate during the teaching of our students to be literate. So ang masasabi ko lang po, sir, kung sila po ay nasa bahay po at ang mga estudyante po natin are still striving to be literate and proficient in the language, let's focus first on language learning and helping them, become more confident. I believe if our students are of a high self-esteem and high confidence level of their language proficiency, it would somehow help them be able to partake and be an active participant in the integration process of language and the content. But until such time, we cannot. So masasabi ko po dito, kagaya ng example ko kanina, I would suppose audio, kaya matagal ko nang sinasabi po na dahil sa hindi present po si teacher sa mga bahay nila, dapat po naka-record kasi ang mga bata po na still struggling, mahina pa po ang kanilang oral language proficiency, and therefore their listening and their oral language fluency ay still developing, especially in English. So dapat marami silang experience, naririnig paano binabasa ang mga selections na to at kung paano magsalita at maggamit ng wikang ito sa oral language. That's why ang paggamit po natin ng grammar ay functional, kung paano siya nagagamit in various functions. So let's look at how the designs of functional grammar is used. So ang problema nga naman po natin, sir, ang problema natin ay naka-prescribe na po ang order ng sequence ng competencies. Kasi dadagdagan ko na lang po kasi sabi nyo, sir, sinasabi nyo na magpa-functional po tayo. Paano nga kami magpa-functional? Unahin namin ng oral language proficiency. Nakalagay sa aming curriculum po, dapat hanggang reading na po yun, hanggang writing na po siya. Paano nga naman ang gagawin nun? Magagawa po yun. Magandang design po yun pag ang mga bata nasa school kasi merong immediate intervention ang mga teachers doon sa loob ng classroom. Pero nga pag distance nga naman ng mga bata, hindi nakikita ni teacher, wala akong masagot dyan, sir. Yun lang talaga. Train the parents. Sir, hindi po active ang parents. Good luck po sa mga bata. Yun po ang problema natin. Because for as long as our students have not acquired a certain literacy level of the language and proficiency, both oral and written, in the language, there's a high possibility that they will struggle in understanding the different content areas. So I'll think about that. Paano nga naman yun kung mga bata ay struggling sa language at nasa bahay sila, wala si teacher, walang support sa mga magulang, walang support sa mga adults, walang TV, walang technology, mag-isa na lang siya. Okay. Walang technology. Yes, that's not a good ideal situation for our students. They must have what I call as a hard scaffold. Ang hard scaffold po talaga ay presence of an adult who would support their learning of the language. Yun po talaga ang primordial basic formula for helping students in the language because they need a model. Kung wala mga gadgets to replace the presence of a teacher, a presence of an adult, then everything would fall down to hoping that the students will learn by himself or by herself. Standards nga ito may mga rules yan Hindi naman alam ng bata mga rules. Babasahin po niya, nandun sa module, hindi pa nga siya proficient magbasa. Paano nga ba naman yun? So tama ka sir, it's a challenge. So yun po, wala pa kung walang-wala talaga sa bahay ang mga bata, walang support, lalo siya pong magiging problemadong bata. Pagbalik niya sa school, isang grade level ang nagdagdag sa kanyang kahinaan. Sorry po, I cannot answer. I don't have a ready answer for that question because there must be, for those students with that low level of proficiency in the English language or any language for that matter, need a face-to-face interaction or a tutor. So pwede mag-hire ang mga magulang ng tutor. Sir, wala nga silang pamperang yun nga, wala tayong magawa. Siguro yun pong i-allow sana ng mga school na yung na-identify ni teacher na struggling students, ay allow ng mga principals na, ma'am, ito po ang tututukan namin sa face-to-face, gagawin po namin ng paraan. So, tapos yung the rest po ng mga independent learners naman na po, pwede po sila mag-modular. Pero ito mga, kasi kawawa pong aking PBBB, tapos magiging magiging dropouts. Sa una naman sisisihin. Na-imagine ko na kayo mga teachers sa field. Sige po, I'll try. Sige po, makipag-usap po ako sa mga kakilala ko po doon sa central office. How that scenario. Thank you very much. It's a good question. Do you have another question?
That's all the questions we have for now, brother. Any last reminders to our viewers for today po?
Sorry, I don't have enough time. Okay, no. Oh, it's already. I only have 2 minutes left. Sorry, I have a religious responsibility after this. So my conclusions are just a few statements. Let's just read that. Language and content integration is a process of explicitly and implicitly helping students apply their language skills, listening, speaking, reading, writing, viewing across content areas, and vice versa. As I've explained, it can be done in the language subject area where they integrate the content, or it can be done in the content areas, as ideally it should be the content area, and the content areas are also language teachers, with the support of the language teachers, and help students understand the language of the content area. But again, we go back to the question of sir, paano nga kung struggling pa, nasa bahay sila? Yun po, wala akong masasagot dyan. And then we have, next would be, students are not learning passively as learning science and history or other monolingual context. They are learning in a very active and challenging way, meaning one way or the other, students are able to actively process because language is present in the content. And whether we like it or not, students will not be able to understand the content if they do not understand the content. And since content and since language is a vehicle of thought, then they are actively thinking about the content. But then again, balik po ulit tayo sa tanong ni Sir Jan. Sir, kung paano nga hindi sila magaling sa English, struggling pa sila doon, edi apektado nga ang kanilang pagpuproseso. So kung apektado ang proseso nila, apektado ka lang learning sa subject area. Galing mo. Sabihin po natin yan sa central office. Next, we have language and content integration. Promotes situational adaptability where students learn how to adapt themselves, their communication, and their... So, dahil nagkakaroon ng integration ng language sa content, students somehow are able to learn to adopt to certain situations like the situation of the content area. Okay, balik ulit tayo sa tanong ni Sir Jan. Sir nga, kung paano hindi pa sila marunong talaga sa language, paano sila mag-a-adapt? Balik ulit tayo. So, paano nga sila mapopromote nun? Wala ng support. And next, we have language and content integration. We have encouraged students to look at things in different directions and from different perspectives. Therefore, students become more intelligent than they already were before. And because they're able to adjust to the demands of the subject area, learning the language, how it behaves in the subject area, it helps them come up with better ways to process information. That again, on the premise that they are literate and have a certain level of proficiency in the language, either in Filipino or English. But all those who have not reached a certain independent level, proficient level of the use of the English language and the Filipino language in oral and written form, they would definitely struggle a lot with what's happening in our educational system in this coming school year. Those students who are struggling or have been struggling for in the past year would struggle even more because they really need more support, language support, content support, from a hard scaffold, either the parent or the teachers or the tutor. But if all these factors are taken away from our students, I would say our students would just say, to heck with it, I don't know anything, I'll stop. Hindi na mag-aaral. Kahit ang dami niyong binigyan ng module na yan, hindi niya aralin yan. On that note, I'll think about that, how we can overcome that, and I'll propose a topic on it if God would somehow give me an idea of how to address that situation, which I guess would be the most prevailing situation of most Filipino learners right now in majority of the population of our learners from elementary up to high school. I'll think about that. That's a challenge, Sir John. You made me think so deeply tonight, and I'll pray for an answer. Hopefully, God will provide us with an answer, and then I'll propose a topic to Vibal so that we can address that question. How do we help students learn language and content who have not reached a proficient level of the language in both oral and written? Tay, ang ganda ng topic. Okay, sir. Let that be a challenge to me, and I'll think about that, and I'll read a lot of researches, what other countries have been doing. I don't have a situation, that's our new situation here in the Philippines. So I'll try to look at other countries have been doing distance education and how they were able to overcome such situation and such predicament. So on that note, I would like to thank everyone for partaking with our discussion. Thank you very much. These questions really challenges us because we don't have one ready answer for all the situations that our students. What we can do perhaps is think that what are the possible situations that our students will be facing and our teachers will be facing, and how we can overcome those. And by you guys giving us questions like that makes us think, and then we will do some research for you, and then we will be able to address that and present that to you. With that note, thank you very much for being active participants in our conversation. I don't see this as a webinar, but mostly an online conversation with the teachers out there who have problems that they are facing right now, and they are looking for answers how they can overcome those situations. Thank you very much, and I'll hopefully to see you again on Friday. On my topic on Friday, and my topics for next week too, and other topics that Vibal will be coming up with in the near future. Muchísimas gracias. Buenas noches.
There we have it. On behalf of Vibal Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today for this very insightful learning session. It is an honor to have you with us today, brother. And to all our Kavibal viewers, all thanks to you for your continuous patronage to our daily learning session. Muli, maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat.